name is Megan Reed, and I am doing my presentation on Helen Keller. Helen Keller was born on June 27, 1880, and she died on June 1st, 1968. The early years. Helen Keller was born on June 27, 1880 in Tecumseh, Alabama. In 1882, Keller fell ill and became blind, deaf, and mute. Keller's illness was called brain fever from their family doctor. Experts today believe it may have been scarlet fever or meningitis. She was only 18 months old. Keller's first exposure to communication since her illness was developed with a lady named Martha Washington, the young daughter of the family cook. They created over 60 signs together by the time that Helen Keller was 7 years old. Even with these signs, Keller still had uncontrollable behavior. She would often become angry and lash out by kicking and screaming. When she was happy, she would laugh uncontrollably. Many family members thought she should be institutionalized. Fighting for hope. Helen's tantrums got so excessive and out of control that her parents knew something had to be done. The incident that drew the line was when Helen purposely knocked over her younger sister's cradle out of rage. Her mother found hope when reading a novel by Charles Dickens about a girl named Laura Brigman, who was also deafblind and yet was taught how to communicate. She was educated by a director at the Perkins Institute for the Blind. Her parents made a trip to Baltimore to visit an expert eye doctor in hopes of good news in 1886. Once again, they were told nothing could be done to restore Helen's sight, but this time she was directed to visit Alexander Graham Bell in Washington, D.C. Bell's mother and wife were both deaf, so he devoted himself to improving the lives for those who were hearing impaired. Still searching for hope. Once Bell and Keller met, they clicked right away, eventually leading to what would become a lifelong friendship. While Bell wasn't able to be Keller's personal teacher, he encouraged them to reach out to the Perkins Institute for the Blind in hopes that they could find Helen a teacher. Finally, a glimpse at hope. After months of waiting, the Kellers finally heard back from the institution with an answer. The institution director had found a teacher for Helen Keller, and her name was Anne Sullivan. Anne Sullivan. Helen and Anne were introduced to each other in March of 1887. After long, extraneous hours of trying to teach Helen a form of communication, on April 5, 1887, they had a major breakthrough. Anne was pumping water from a well and pouring the water over Helen's hands while spelling the word water into her hand. It was there that Helen finally connected these objects with the word. Over the next 6 months, Helen learned over 600 words and was taught how to read Braille and write. Helen was such a brilliant young girl, and she was so anxious to learn. Long road of learning ahead. Once Helen started making huge progressive leaps, reporters became extremely interested in her story. She began to dream big, wishing to attend at Radcliffe College, but first she needed to complete high school. Keller attended high school at a school for the deaf in New York City and later transferred to a school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The schooling process was both mentally and physically straining on Helen and Anne, as Anne continued to help her throughout her schooling years. After high school, Keller was accepted into Radcliffe College in 1990 and graduated from the university in 1904 with honors. During her college years, Helen became interested in writing her own novel and was introduced to John Macy, a Harvard English teacher who would help her edit her work. This later resulted in the publishing of Helen's first book, The Story of My Life, which was released in 1903, 1 year before she graduated from college. What's next? Once Helen had graduated, her teacher Anne Sullivan and proofreading friend John Macy wed and invited Helen to live in their home with them. John also encouraged Helen to read about socialism, and Helen was intrigued enough to join the Socialist Party in 1909. She also supported the women's suffrage movement. Helen decided to write more novels in the meantime. Two of them were The World I Live In, and Out of the Dark. These novels didn't do the best with the public. Helen and Anne decided it would be the smartest thing, financially speaking, for them to go on a tour around the states giving lectures to help them rake in some extra money. By the time for the tours, Helen had learned to speak a little, but only those who were close to her knew what she was saying. Because of this, when she spoke during her part of the lectures, Anne would interpret for her. This exhausted Sullivan even more. While the tours were very successful, they were also very straining on both ladies, and eventually was a main reason in John filing for divorce against Anne. After Anne's divorce, Polly Thompson was hired in 1915 to help Sullivan with all of her responsibilities. Achievements worth recognition. Over the next few years, Helen also starred in a movie about her life titled Deliverance, participated in vaudeville performances with Anne Sullivan, joined and worked for a new organization named the American Foundation for the Blind. Here she helped the organization raise funds and also convinced governmental figures to offer more funding to print books in Braille. And she also wrote another book titled Midstream. Saying Goodbyes. In the midst of everything Keller was accomplishing, Anne Sullivan became deathly ill, eventually leading to her passing in October of 1936. She died while Helen held her hand. Helen deeply struggled with Sullivan's death, but was greatly relieved by the American Foundation for the Blind, informing her they would help her financially the rest of her years. Polly still stayed by Helen's side and traveled with her around the world until their 70s. It was around this time that Polly died in 1860. They had been friends for 46 years. The Final Days. In 1962, The Miracle Worker was released to theaters and told the story of Sullivan and Keller's relationship over the years. This movie did great in theaters and was also a good way to highlight all of the achievements over Helen's life as she approached her final years. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson awarded Helen Keller the Presidential Medal of Freedom, being one of the highest awards/achievements she had ever received. On June 1st, 1968, Helen suffered from a heart attack and passed away at the age of 87. More than 1,200 people attended her funeral in Washington, D.C. Influence. Helen Keller has been such an inspiration to so many people, despite the cards that she was dealt in life. She never gave up and always persevered. She never let people tell her what she was and wasn't capable of doing. She just instead always proved them wrong. She accomplished so much over the span of her life and inspires people still to this day to never give up. Two quotes that Helen Keller will always be remembered for saying are, "The most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart," and "Optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope and confidence." With that wraps up my presentation on Helen Keller, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Listed below are the references that I used to complete this